Hey everyone, it's Kelsey from Literary Gladiators, and I'm here to do a book review for LGBTQ Pride Month. The book I'll be reviewing is Symptoms of Being Human by Jeff Garvin. It is a young adult novel, which y'all have caught on those are my favorite. This book I'm really excited to review specifically because it was recommended that I read right when I got back to my summer job at the library. All of my coworkers said that they loved it. One of the teens from our gay, lesbian, or whatever / glow book club really loved it. And so I picked it up, and it's about a gender fluid teenager who is the child of a congressman. The thing that I always hear first about it that everybody loves is the fact that the author decided never to reveal what Riley's gender assigned at birth is. Riley is the name of the main character, and the book takes you through Riley's transition, no pun intended, to a new school after going to a private school. Riley is now attending a public school, and just all of the trials and tribulations that Riley goes through at that school and what the new experience is like. So I thought this book was very modern. It was definitely set very now and had a lot to do with blogging and things like that. And it touched on some really important topics. That's the number one thing I want to say about it, is that this book and the story it tells is so important, because identities like gender fluidity and, other non-binary identities are not being talked about as much as, cis, gay, and lesbian identities are, or, just binary trans identities are. So, one, definitely very important that this book even exists, because there aren't many like it out there. Second thing I want to say is that overall I did like it. It was a quick read. It took me 2 days to read. It kept my attention. I wanted to know where it was going, where the story was going, and I was invested in the characters. I wasn't a huge fan of the writing, but I understood the way it was written, because it was written from the point of view of a young teenager. So, of course, it has to be written in that manner. My other thoughts on it is that I liked its portrayal of that gender identity to an extent, but I thought it was kind of too simplistic, the terms that it was put into. But as a starter novel, as just something that's, kind of grazing the surface of what it's like to live with an identity like that, I think it did a very good job at, being an intro to those kind of identities. But the way that it was described as sort of a dial that could be turned one way or another, and that, the feminine traits and masculine traits could be satisfied with just a change in posture, or or a walk. Yeah, those things do help from what I know, but it's not the full extent of it. So that's what I mean by grazing the surface. It gets at those very surface things, sometimes just a change in posture or just the way you walk does denote the kind of gender expression you're expressing, but that's not the extent of it. But I kind of feel that's how the book portrayed it as, this is what gender fluidity is, and this is how somebody deals with it and the extent of it. But there's so much more deep emotional layers to it that are obviously hard to capture in text, especially if the person writing the novel doesn't identify that way. The other thing I like about the novel is that it touched on something that I think is really important, that's really important to me, which is, being an advocate for LGBTQ issues and, educating others on it, not for myself and my identity, but because for others and those who identify in similar ways or ways that I, don't personally identify. A lot of the activism that I do, or a lot of the things that I'm involved in, are because I care so much about others, and I want to make not only myself comfortable, but really I want to make you know, like my friends who identify certain ways comfortable, and I just want to make sure as many people are educated as possible, or that by my being out and my being a voice that's often heard, that there's representation for others. And Riley in the novel goes down that path, you know, starts writing and keeps speaking, not only for themselves but for others. Which brings me to another point, you know, my using the pronoun they. I appreciated that they didn't reveal the gender assigned at birth of the main character, but I don't like that they didn't address pronouns, really. They addressed it in the way that, like, Riley putting pronouns onto others in the way that they perceived it, which I thought was interesting, because that is something that people who identify as non-binary or trans deal with, is that, like, you know, non-binary individuals and trans individuals, you know, are very, like, you know, pronouns are important, respect my pronouns, you know, that's like a mantra in the community and everything, but oftentimes it's hard to put it in practice yourself, even when you're part of the community. So, like, even if you identify as non-binary, sometimes you see yourself gendering others in a way that might be misgendering them. But I didn't like how the author didn't really address pronouns to, like, a bigger extent, and address, you know, what Riley's pronouns are, and if, you know, pronouns are important to Riley and things like that, because I feel like that's a very important part of gender identity, and it was just kind of something that was kind of, like, skipped over in a way. So I feel like the gender identity discussed in the book was, you know, it was kind of like a generalization, and it didn't go into depth with all of these other, like, facets of gender identity. One other thing that I enjoyed about the novel were the other characters, that they came from different backgrounds, had different experiences and different reactions to Riley's identity, as well as different, you know, kind of ways of thinking about it. So I like that, you know, the one character had a connection to, you know, gender identity issues that wasn't a personal connection. So it wasn't like, oh yeah, Riley goes to this new school and, like, oh my god, there's a trans person there. It was, you know, somebody who had a different, like, a more removed connection from it, but in a way that made it them sensitive towards it. And then the other friend that Riley makes, I like that he connects to Riley in a way that's, you know, like, he personally feels for how Riley is struggling, but in a way that has nothing to do with gender identity. And I like that it was kind of like those friendships that were formed there were a really good expression of how you don't have to be, like, a part of the community or identify within the community to fully understand, or to try to understand and be compassionate towards somebody who is struggling with gender identity or who is a part of the community. I like that it kind of, like, touched on that topic without, you know, outright saying it. I also like that both positive and negative coming out experiences were highlighted in the novel, and I also like that there were some parts of the novel that gave advice to people who were encountering somebody who was struggling with their gender identity or struggling with coming out, because not only was the novel, so although the novel was lacking in some things about gender identity and, like, the in-depth parts of being gender fluid, it was more in-depth with, you know, information on how to approach a situation with somebody who identifies within the community is thinking about coming out. I like that, you know, Riley had to struggle with what to tell these people, and went through what I felt were, like, the proper steps when dealing with somebody who might be in danger because they're coming out, or who, you know, is struggling with coming out. I thought that appropriate steps were demonstrated, like, you know, don't tell everybody that it's a great idea to come out of the closet. Like, there's certain questions that need to be asked first, you know, they need to really think about, like, what their home life is like, what they think their parents are going to say, things like that. Like, you know, it's not just like a, you know, you know, sure, go do it, like, it's fine, everything's gonna be fine, because it's not always fine. And that, you know, Riley didn't always say, like, oh, I have all the answers, like, I'm an expert on it because I identify in the community. Here are some resources that will help you. Because those are things that we should all be practicing in our lives, that if somebody comes to you with one of these problems, that you, no matter how much you think you know about the community, you can never be an expert, because our community is constantly changing. And there's always somebody who's gonna have better resources and better tools than you do, so you can give as much of the tools as you can, but it's always good to defer to something else. Be like, you know, this is my experience, and I'm not telling you definitely come out because I had a good experience, or don't come out because I had a bad experience, but like, this is how I feel. Go to this resource. They can help you, you know, talk to somebody else. So I definitely like how it touched on, you know, being informative about coming out in the community, and just about coaching people or helping people through their, like, identity process. Overall, if I were gonna rate the book, on the scale of young adult cringe factor, it was definitely like an 8 at times. Like, sometimes I was just like, ooh, yeah, no, I totally felt that way when I was like 14, but like, it hurts me to read this. Overall quality of the book, I would say I would probably give it like a 7 out of a 10, just because like, it wasn't my favorite LGBTQ book I've ever read. But it was good, and a lot of the stuff addressed in it was so important. So overall, I would recommend anybody who's interested in kind of, you know, grazing the surface of LGBTQ YA literature, or who wants to read a little bit more about being gender fluid, that's a good and easy place to start. So that's all for my book review. Definitely check out Symptoms of Being Human by Jeff Garvin, and happy Pride!